For many people, The Legend of Zelda will always be one of the best series ever made. The combination of beautiful stories, engaging gameplay, and incredible worlds to explore make it a series that is truly unforgettable. And though it didn't start that way, Zelda is best known for its 3D adventures. So today we're going to talk about the unforgettable world of 3D Zelda games, and it all started with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The Nintendo 64 was the first Nintendo console that was able to output 3D graphics. But even with the giant jump in strength between the Super Nintendo and the Nintendo 64, the original plan for the development of this game was not for the Nintendo 64 itself, but for the Nintendo 64 disk drive.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, the 64 disk drive is not the most popular accessory. It only had a handful of games and none of them were that impressive, but originally Ocarina of Time was planned to be an exclusive release for that hardware. But due to a bunch of technical constraints and delays, they ended up having the game released on a standard cartridge. Now, Ocarina of Time was developed at the same time as Mario Kart 64 and Super Mario 64, so Nintendo's EAD division was making some absolute gems during this time. Now, we all know Ocarina of Time is one of Nintendo's most ambitious titles of all time. With the release of the N64, this was the first time Nintendo's major IPs could come into the world of 3D gaming, and Zelda made the jump arguably as good as Mario did. The Legend of Zelda series has always been about puzzle solving and exploration, two things that translated extremely well into the 3D environment. And there's a reason that a lot of people put The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time as one of the best games ever made. It stood as inspiration for many of the fan favorite RPGs that came out for years afterwards. Now, story-wise, Zelda has always been a series that is very complicated, but Ocarina of Time is really the reason that it becomes as complicated as it is.
So listen, if he lives, the world gets flooded, but if he dies, there's a ceiling war.
Straw Hat, you need to take your medication.
I don't need the medication!
I'm not going to sit here and try and explain the Zelda timeline because honestly, I would sound like an idiot and get half of the information wrong. I have the book, but I don't know how to read. But what I do know is that the game starts off with Navi waking up Link from a nightmare, where he sees Ganon taking Zelda and running off on horseback, and Navi brings him to see the Great Deku Tree, who then tells him he needs to go to Hyrule Castle and meet Zelda. Zelda tells him she's also been having these weird dreams, and then Zelda tells Link he needs to track down all 3 spiritual stones, one of which was already given to him by the Great Deku Tree, and collect the fabled Ocarina of Time.
Oh, look, they said the name!
And you end up going on a great adventure full of time travel, mysteries, and also a lot of water. Now, this wasn't the first Zelda game to have an impressive and engaging story. Games like A Link to the Past had come out years before this, and had just as good of a story as this. But what made Ocarina of Time so special is that not only did it have an incredible story, but it was also an incredibly groundbreaking game. When this game was released, many companies were trying to bring their characters into 3D for the first time. Series like Mario and The Legend of Zelda did this transition perfectly, where other series like Sonic the Hedgehog struggled to capture the same magic the series was known for. And it led to Ocarina of Time getting perfect scores almost across the board. It was an absolute sensation. Everybody had to play the new Legend of Zelda game, and it ended up being the 4th best-selling game on the entire console. And if you're counting games that are single-player only, it's the 2nd best-selling game. Everything from the controls to the soundtrack to the incredibly complex and engaging puzzle design made this something that everybody had to play. Now, as someone who grew up with an N64, I don't have an issue going back and playing it. But for a lot of people who didn't grow up with the N64, it's very hard to try and teach them how to use this controller. It was just a really bad design, and there's a reason that no other controllers have really tried to replicate this shape.
Why does it look like that?
But there's been a way to play Ocarina of Time on almost every single Nintendo console since. If you own a GameCube, a Wii, a Wii U, a Switch, or a 3DS, you can play Ocarina of Time, but if I ever want to go back and play this game, I always reach for my 3DS. Now, Ocarina of Time got a remake for the 3DS, and in my opinion, it's my favorite way to reach for this game. The one thing I'll give the home consoles in this race is that sitting down on the couch and playing on a TV with a controller is a better experience. But the remake that was released for the 3DS had far better graphics and made some tweaks to the game that made a lot of the small issues I did have with this game almost entirely disappear. In the original version, there were areas areas like the infamous water temple that just didn't work as well as I think Nintendo wanted them to. For the time, it was not that big of a deal, but a lot of new technologies had come out that had made gameplay far smoother than it was on the N64, and the 3DS remake is just a better version overall. But if you don't have a 3DS and don't want to try and hunt one down and find this game, playing this on NSO or the Virtual Console worked just as well. And there's a reason that a lot of people put this at the top of their list for best games ever made. And after its wild success, Nintendo knew they had to keep the momentum going, and they ended up releasing Majora's Mask. Just a short 2 years after the release of Ocarina of Time, Nintendo ended up releasing Majora's Mask for the N64. Now aesthetically, Majora's Mask looks extremely similar to Ocarina of Time. They reused a lot of assets, including the engine, which really expedited the game development time, but also led to these two games looking very similar. But unlike Ocarina of Time, in order to play this, you had to have the N64 expansion pack. It was a plug-in accessory for the N64 that doubled the amount of RAM the console had, and it allowed it to take on some more ambitious titles that wouldn't have been able to be played on the console otherwise. Now, Ocarina of Time wasn't an incredibly dark game. It definitely touched on some mature themes, and had you literally slashing down things with a sword, but it still had a light-hearted Nintendo feel that most other games the company is known for had. But Majora's Mask had a very different vibe to it. It was a much darker and eerier tone that was something that was very new territory for not only the series, but for Nintendo as a whole. Now, of course, you have series like Metroid that have always had a dark and eerie feel to them, but Nintendo had never taken one of their IPs and made it extremely dark before. This is a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time and takes place a few months after the events that took place there. Link gets knocked off his horse and gets his ocarina stolen. You're introduced to Skull Kid, who's wearing the Majora's Mask, which has possessed him and made him evil, and using the magic of the mask, he ends up turning Link into a Deku Scrub.
Take that, scrub boy!
Link finds out the Skull Kid stole the mask from a mask salesman, but the mask salesman is apparently too busy to wait around for his stolen merchandise because he has to leave in 72 hours. And that introduced the main gimmick of this game being the 3-day cycle. The entire game takes place over the course of 3 days, however, using the Ocarina of Time, you can set that clock back and start at the 3rd day again. Now, time management becomes an extremely important part of this game, so if you're someone with ADHD, you may struggle in this game like I did, but once you figure out how to navigate the clock-based system, everything starts to fall into place. Now, Majora's Mask wasn't as successful as Ocarina of Time was, but it did a lot of things to really make it stand out. Using the masks in this game, you get to play as a lot of different races from the world of Zelda. You can play as a Deku, a Goron, and even a Zora, which is a dream come true for fans of the world of Zelda. Because I mean, look at this thing. Don't you want to be that? It kind of looks like Bellsprout. Like I said before, they really went another direction with the storytelling in this game. It touched on some dark and mature narratives that really pushed the series forward. Skull Kid is probably my favorite villain in all of Zelda. He's just a normal guy who got corrupted by the evil inside of Majora's Mask, and it's a really interesting way to tell a story. The villain wasn't the character you were fighting, it was the evil that possessed him. Now, similar to Ocarina of Time, there were a lot of ways to play this game, and just like Ocarina of Time, this game also got a 3DS port, which I think is the best way to play it. Of course, the most noticeable change was the visuals, which look absolutely stunning. There was also a load of UI changes, which makes the HUD more clear and makes navigating menus even better. There was also some quality of life changes, like in the change to the Song of Double Time, which now lets you jump to a specific hour of the current day as opposed to just jumping to the start of the day. And there were changes to certain mask forms that made it so playing as these characters was even more fun than the original. Again, if you don't have a 3DS, you don't have to worry because you can play this game on the Switch or any other Nintendo console if you have it on the Virtual Console, but I really don't recommend playing it on the GameCube. Now, I didn't mention this in the Ocarina of Time section, but the only way to play this game on the GameCube is if you had the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition promo disc. As an idea, I absolutely adore this. It had 4 incredible Zelda games from throughout history, with The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask, and this was included in a lot of GameCube bundles or through magazine subscriptions.
Magazines? Who's gotten one of those since 2003?
But as great of a deal as this was, it didn't work as well as you'd want. These were not full ports of the games over the GameCube, they were just ROM images run by emulators on the console, so there are a lot of flaws when you try and play it this way. It's just glitchy and not fun, and even though I loved the idea of playing these games on this console, there's just no way to make this even a comparable experience to what you can get on the N64 or any of the other consoles. But there was one more thing available on this demo disc, and that was a demo for the next 3D Zelda game, game, which was The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. People loved the 3D Zelda games, and when the GameCube was announced, they knew they were going to get a new one eventually. And the first time we heard about a new Zelda game coming to the GameCube was at Space World 2000, where we got this tech demo for The Legend of Zelda that was absolutely gorgeous. It showed a realistic looking Link fight Ganondorf, and it was incredible to see. So needless to say, when the next Zelda game came out looked like this, people were very confused. The biggest change to Wind Waker was absolutely the art style, and I would like to go on record and state that I absolutely love this art style. It was the first game in the series to employ the new cell shading style, and it gave it a cartoonish and timeless look that I love to this day. But that was not the consensus from everyone. The game's development was led by Eiji Aonuma, and from the beginning of the game's development, he tried to keep it quiet, because he knew that people like Miyamoto would take issue with the new cartoonish art style of the series. Miyamoto was opposed to this game having a cartoonish art style, and would often remind Aonuma about how it was not too late to change it back. But he ended up giving up and allowing them to go with this new art style, which ended up getting mixed receptions. I think as time's gone on, people have gotten more and more accepting of how the game looks, but at the time, people were shocked that Wind Waker looked so starkly different from other games in the series. Now the story has Link setting out to rescue his sister, who is captured by the biggest bird you'll ever see, and he has to take to the seas and explore a flooded Hyrule full of monsters, dungeons, and quests, similar to the older games in the series, but with even more water. Compared to the other games in the Zelda series, this is the odd one out. No other Zelda game has had an expansive open world where you sail around, but it's something that works extremely well given the context of the game. You have a talking boat named the King of Red Lions, and along with his help, you have to go around gathering the pieces of the Triforce in order to defeat Ganondorf and restore peace to the land of Hyrule. Similar to the Ocarina of Time from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Link is given a magical wind baton that allows him to control the direction of the wind. And given this is a game that involves a lot of sailing, that is extremely helpful. Now, though this game looks very different from any of the other Zelda games that we've gotten, it plays very similar to any of the other games in the series. It still has the standard gameplay that you've come to know and love, where you explore different dungeons, meet incredible characters, and fight Ganon in a climactic battle. Though this game was very different, it showed how flexible the series could be. The standard Zelda experience has you exploring a set open world and solving puzzles in order to navigate through it. But being able to take to the high seas is something that just works. And though the new art style was vastly different than anything we were used to, the cartoonish nature helped this game stand the test of time and look incredible to this day. When you go back and look at the original versions of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, when they were released, they looked absolutely incredible, but compared to modern graphics, they don't look as realistic as they did at the time. That's not to say they look bad, but they just don't hold that sense of realism they were going for. But since they abandoned the idea of realism altogether in this game, and instead opted to go for a charming cartoon aesthetic, it allowed this game to stand the test of time and look visually stunning to this day. It doesn't matter if you're playing on the GameCube or you're playing the HD remastered version for the Wii U, you're going to have a great time. Similar to Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, the upgraded visuals look incredible, and the quality of life changes just make this the premier way to play. Of course, the game's art style is still incredible, but having it in full HD made everything pop so much more. And after playing this game and having the ability to use the Swift Sail, it's hard to go back and enjoy the GameCube version as much. Also, the HD version comes with the Hero mode, which is just a hard mode for Zelda, and even though it's deathly punishing, it's still really fun to play. But it doesn't matter how you play this game because the Wind Waker is an incredible time. It showed that Link was extremely versatile, and the Legend of Zelda formula could work well in almost every context. But when it released, a lot of people had some less than nice things to say about the Wind Waker. They wanted a more authentic, dark and gritty Zelda game more close to Majora's Mask in tone, which led to the development of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess.
But why does Twilight Princess sound like the name of a My Little Pony?
Unlike Wind Waker, this game supported a more realistic and gritty art style that looked more similar to what we saw in the Space World demo. This was a launch title for the Nintendo Wii, but it also came out for the GameCube, which was great because it worked really well for both versions. Originally, the plan was to make a Wind Waker 2, which I would still love to see Nintendo do today, but after seeing the demand for a realistic Zelda game, they ended up modifying the Wind Waker engine and making this. Of course, you play as Link, who's a farmhand in Ordon Village, who helps teach kids in the village to use the slingshot and sword, which is definitely not safe, but I guess if I was living in the world of Hyrule, I would want to know how to fight all of this nonsense as well. Cut to a few days in the future, and Link gets knocked unconscious and turned into a wolf. He is then transported to Hyrule Castle, where he's held prisoner, and he encounters Midna. With Midna's help, your goal is to rid the world of Twilight and save Hyrule from the evil villain Zant. Twilight Princess served as a return to form for the 3D Zelda games fans had come to know and love. As a launch title for the Wii, it had motion controls built in, which made the game really stand out compared to other games, but if you were playing on the GameCube version, it controlled just like your standard Legend of Zelda games did back on the N64. If I had to pick a game this was most closely related to, it would be Majora's Mask, because similar to how dark that game was, this game kind of fit the same bill. The dark and gritty themes really worked well with the Zelda formula, and was a really nice contrast to Wind Waker's upbeat charm. It had some of the best dungeons in the entire series, and a great cast of characters that really stand out. Exploring Hyrule in this game was just as fun as ever. The cinematic nature of this game really lends itself to the Zelda story and the world of Hyrule, and makes it really fun. But it's the Zelda game that I go back and want to play the least. That's not to say it's bad by any means, but it had some flaws that make it so I don't really love going back and playing it. The start of this game is really my biggest issue because it takes so long to get going. It's a really slow burn for the first 2 or 3 hours, and I would rather jump right into the fun than have to get a lot of exposition thrown into my face. But again, that's not to say this game is bad, it's just a little narrative heavy where it doesn't need to be. But if I am going to play it, I'm definitely going to play the Twilight Princess HD version that was released on the Wii U. It's an enhanced remake of the game, which made the graphics look a lot better, and it helps the game's art style hold up a lot better. Like I was talking about with Wind Waker, the GameCube and Wii versions really struggled from their attempt to make a very realistic looking game. For the time, they did an incredible job, but if you go back and play this on the GameCube or Wii, it does not look as good as it did when I was 10. So getting a full HD upscaling for the Wii U version really helped this game a lot. There was also a load of quality of life adjustments, which makes the gameplay a lot smoother, which makes the Wii U version the premier way to play this, but I think Twilight Princess gets a lot of bad press. It's overlooked a lot, and I can understand why to a point, but it was still a top-notch Zelda game, even if it was overshadowed by games like Ocarina of Time. But if you thought that Twilight Princess got bad press, then you were in for a rough ride with The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword releasing for the Wii. Now, Skyward Sword has gone through a lot. I have never seen a title divide a fan base more than Skyward Sword. I have a very neutral opinion, but apparently that's worse than either loving it or hating it. With the development of Wind Waker, they wanted to push the buttons of what Zelda could be. The Nintendo Wii had motion controls built into almost every game. With games like Twilight Princess, you would use motion controls to swing the sword, and that ended up being the case for the new Legend of Zelda game that they were making for the console. But they wanted to take that and bring it to an 11, with Skyward Sword having a huge focus on motion controls throughout the story for almost everything you do. The Wii changed gaming in a lot of ways. It made it accessible for pretty much anybody, and using motion controls was a main feature in that. So it really made sense for Zelda to hop onto that bandwagon and make something that was truly unique. The problem is that they put a little too much dip on their chip.
There is no such thing as too much dip on a chip.
Skyward Sword dared to be different and really pushed the controls of the series into a brand new direction. Now, as of right now, this is the first game in the Zelda timeline. You start on the floating island of Skyloft and you play as Link with your best friend Zelda, and Link is a knight in training, and he's very good at flying on the backs of the giant birds known as Loftwings. The world below the floating islands is thought to be a myth, as Link, Zelda, and all of the other inhabitants of the island had never seen the ground. Link ends up passing his final exam to be a knight, but while celebrating his success with Zelda, she ends up getting sucked into a giant tornado. Link then has to go on a journey to get Zelda back by exploring the lands below, in one of the best narratives that Zelda has ever had. Like I said before, Skyward Sword is one of the most divisive Zelda games of all time. The focus on motion controls alienated the longtime fans of the series because a lot of people didn't want to be forced to play in motion. And similar to Twilight Princess, the game takes a good amount of time to get going, which made a lot of people really hesitant to pick up this game. It suffered from a lot of issues other games in the series really didn't. It had an extremely linear story with a lot of hand-holding, where Fi would pop up on the screen far too often and give you a hint about something that was plainly obvious, with a lot of backtracking and repeated boss fights. But if you could get through what was lackluster about the gameplay, you were in for one of the best stories Zelda had to offer. And it's really a shame they were focused on reinventing the wheel with the gameplay, rather than just making a traditional Zelda game that was enhanced by motion controls and not controlled entirely by the need to do it. Now, people's major complaint with the motion controls was the fact that you couldn't turn them off, but that was fixed when this game was ported to the Switch, and it made the game so much easier to play. When I would play this on the Wii, I would feel like I was getting a full body workout with the amount I was having to move my arms around.
Oh, I am so excited to play this game. I've only been playing for 10 minutes.
I love the idea of motion controls. In fact, I actually like to play with the motion controls, but the fact that I didn't have the option to turn it off on the Wii version really threw me for a loop. It made long play sessions almost unbearable. But considering the Switch had the Switch Lite, which didn't have detachable Joy-Cons, if they were going to port this game over, they had to map all of the button options, which made it so I could finally sleep at night knowing I could play Skyward Sword without doing a full body workout. They also made it so Fi doesn't pop up on the screen as much, and made most of those dialogues optional, which was an incredible change. Along with adding the ability to skip through dialogues and cutscenes all together in the base game, and not just in hero mode, and it made this the premier way to play this game. I really cannot go back and play Skyward Sword on the Wii without having a terrible time. So if you're going to play this game, it is 100% worth it to play it on the Switch. It is the best way to experience this game, hands down. But as far as the traditional dungeon crawling Zelda experience, this was the last real game we got. That's not to say that this was the last 3D Zelda game, but for a lot of fans who love the dungeon crawling 3D Zelda games of the past, this is the last one we've got because the next game, Breath of the Wild, changed everything that Zelda was known for. Compared to the other games in the series, Breath of the Wild was an entirely new direction for Zelda to go in. Originally planned to be a Wii U exclusive title, the game had a massive development time because of the sheer scale it was going to be. Originally set for release in 2015, it ended up getting pushed back for the launch of the Switch in 2017. Now, Zelda had always been known for its open world environments, allowing you to navigate the worlds you're exploring, but in a somewhat structured and linear fashion. But Breath of the Wild took everything that was known about the Zelda experience and threw it away, and created an entirely new open world experience where you could do whatever you wanted whenever you wanted to. From the moment you start the game and explore the world, everything that you see you can go to and explore. There's no set direction of what you should do and when. The game's emphasis on freedom allowed any player to take it in any order they wanted to. After the tutorial, if you wanted to go directly to the final boss fight, you could do that. Or if you wanted to go explore every nook and cranny the game had to offer, you could do that too. With so much to do and a story that let you go in any direction you wanted to, the fact that they were able to make a cohesive narrative out of this was absolutely stunning. And the fact that it worked as well as it did is even crazier. You play as Link, who wakes up from a century-long nap. He finds Hyrule having been devastated by Calamity Ganon, who is the incarnate of evil himself, and you follow Link's journey as he sets out to restore his memories and save Hyrule from the calamity that's taken over it. Along the way, you meet a bunch of fan-favorite and new characters, and you learn about the Day of Calamity and what sent Link into a 100-year slumber. Beyond the story, pretty much everything about this game is entirely new. Starting with the gameplay, they went for a new style of open-world exploration, full of sandbox elements that allow you to play the game however you want. You can walk from one side of the map to the other with zero interruptions and loading screens, and that is absolutely crazy to me because this game's map is absolutely massive. It also has a load of survival mechanics that had never been seen in a Zelda game, like cooking, where you can whip up different types of foods to give you health and other bonuses along the way. And it's cool to see Link living out his dreams trying to be the next Master Chef. Probably my favorite change to the game though is the new Sheikah Slate. The new Sheikah Slate is a tool that looks eerily similar to the Nintendo Switch that gives Link a host of strange abilities. He can pick up metal objects, create bombs out of nowhere, create ice blocks, and freeze enemies and objects in their place to give even more freedom about how to take your encounters. I swear if the next Nintendo console doesn't give me the ability to create bombs out of nowhere, I don't want it.
Hey, do you want to play a game? I got this new... Oh my god, I'm so sorry!
Yet another huge change to the formula was the fact that weapons had durability. Gone are the days of beating every problem by whacking it with a Master Sword. You now had a huge selection of weapons that you got from exploring the world or defeating enemies that were all incredibly fun to use. The only problem is that they broke after a certain amount of time, which added an additional layer of resource management that wasn't as prevalent in older Zelda games. Sure, you had to manage your potions and bombs, but now every single weapon you use is on a timer. So if you're not consistently prepared, you're going to have a bad time. There was also a load of different armor sets you could wear throughout the game, which made it so you could dress Link up however you like. And what's even better is that a lot of these armor sets had different buffs, which encouraged players to switch between different armor sets to solve different issues. And one of the most notable changes is that they got rid of the traditional dungeon system. In most 3D Zelda games, you would explore different dungeons. There was usually a linear path the story would follow, where you tackle one dungeon after another. But with all of the new freedom in Breath of the Wild, they got rid of the traditional dungeon system altogether, and they replaced them with 120 separate shrines. And each shrine has own unique puzzles, ranging from fighting a strong enemy, solving a puzzle using different elements of the game's physics, and even moving a ball through a maze.
That led me to believe that ball is life.
But all of these changes led to a game that felt very different from any Legend of Zelda game we've gotten previous. And if you were looking for a traditional 3D Zelda game similar to Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, or even Wind Waker, you might have been disappointed. But as someone who absolutely adores all of the old 3D Zelda games, I still think that Breath of the Wild is an incredible game. Sure, it changed a lot about the 3D Zelda formula that fans had come to know and love, but that doesn't mean that we can't go back and get those in the future. I like to think of this as an entirely separate kind of Zelda game. And if you look at the Zelda timeline, this is off in its own space. And it could just be me, but I don't think we're done with the traditional 3D Zelda games of the past. I just think that Nintendo wanted to try something new, and they did an incredible job of it because this won the 2017 Game of the Year. And I'm glad because honestly, I think it deserved it. But maybe someday we'll get a new 3D Zelda game that fits the style of the older titles, but I don't see that happening in the next few years. But after the incredible success of Breath of the Wild, Nintendo knew they had to make another game, which led to the development of Tears of the Kingdom. With Breath of the Wild, they really pushed the boundaries of what a 3D Zelda game could be. And during development, when they were tasked with building a game that was going to be a successor of Breath of the Wild, they wanted to build upon a lot of the magic the game had. In order to create a game that felt like a successor to Breath of the Wild, but in and of itself was a brand new experience. The goal was to create a successor game in the way that Wii Sports Resort was a successor to Wii Sports. Sure, both games are wildly different, but they took what was great about the first game and added onto it without changing the core formula. Tears of the Kingdom takes place a short time after the events of Breath of the Wild, and the game starts with Link and Zelda exploring the forgotten depths of the Hyrule ruins. But they explored a little too far and they found the mummified corpse of Ganondorf, which ended with all-out chaos and Link losing his arm. And while this was happening, a surge of gloom enveloped Hyrule Castle and sent it into the sky. And it also created holes to the forgotten underworld of Hyrule, and even some floating sky islands, reminiscent of Skyward Sword. Now, Tears of the Kingdom took everything that was great about Breath of the Wild and added onto it. This not only included the brand new areas to explore, but it also included a load of gameplay changes that really made the game stand out. The biggest being the emphasis on creativity. Now, Breath of the Wild did a lot of incredible things to give power to the players, which allowed them to take the game on in any order they saw fit. But Tears of the Kingdom added onto that in every possible way. Instead of the Sheikah Slate, you had Link's new fancy arm, which added a lot of abilities that allowed Link to take on the world however he wanted. You could glue two weapons together, attach two objects together, or even make a hover bike, which took the ideas of Breath of the Wild, allowing players to take on the game however they saw fit, and gave the players even more options to do so. Pretty much anything you could possibly imagine in this game is possible. The amount of ways to combine gameplay elements to suit your personal needs is insanely impressive. I routinely found myself gluing two weapons together only because it was possible. There was also 152 new shrines to explore, with the addition of the entire underground, which made this game have so much content that I still play it and find new things every time I do. The amount of content this game has is actually insane. Even without the crazy amount of content and quests, I could play this game for hundreds of hours just exploring. Now, a debate that I see online a lot is what game is better, Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom? And as similar as these games are, I think it's really hard to compare them. Where Breath of the Wild came first and pioneered the genre, Tears of the Kingdom came after and added a lot of things to the game, some of which were absolutely incredible, but others didn't feel as good as they did in Breath of the Wild. But I flip back and forth between what game I like more. In Breath of the Wild, I prefer the Sheikah Slate and Divine Beasts, and a story that felt incredible all the way through. But in Tears of the Kingdom, I prefer the freedom the gameplay offers, and all of the incredible engineering you can do in the game to make literally whatever you want. But I think the new open world 3D Zelda format is something that needs a much larger discussion. There's only 2 games total right now, and I know they're going to make more, but I'm working on a video that compares these 2 games in much further detail, but you can't go wrong with either game. The only problem I have with Tears of the Kingdom is that it was the first Nintendo game priced at $70. And as much as I understand games are expensive to produce, the price of $60 is an industry standard. And I know if you compare the cost of a Super Nintendo game to a game today when adjusted for inflation, you're getting an incredible deal, but everything's more expensive and I really don't want games to start shooting up in price. because I feel that will alienate a large portion of people from playing games. But it doesn't matter what Zelda game you pick up, all of them are going to be an incredible time. From the classic games of Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, to the modern take on the formula with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, every single 3D Zelda game is incredible in its own right.
I can't stop playing them.
But what's your favorite 3D Zelda game? Let me know in the comments, and as always, thank you for watching. I hope that you and your family have an incredible rest of your day, and if you like anything you saw here, please consider subscribing.